On today's show, a change of pace. We go back to the NBA draft and look ahead as well with a full deep dive into second-round pick Mouhamed Gueye. We'll have all of that with Bryce Hendricks and more on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1513 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday evening into Monday here in early July. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at PrizePicks. If you're a first-time user, get 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That is PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. I shall also tell you at the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day. Check out the podcast and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube on the video side. And again, anywhere you get your podcasts. I am joined today by Bryce Hendricks, who covers the NBA draft as well as Washington State basketball over at Upside Swings podcast. I've been on that podcast before, but Bryce is a very, very eager and talented NBA draft scout. And I honestly called him first to talk about Mouhamed Gueye. So we've been doing a lot of free agency stuff on this podcast, lots of trade stuff. And of course, we'll have more draft stuff to come with Summer League looming. In fact, the Hawks play a Summer League game on Friday. But in the middle of all of that, I recorded a couple days ago with Bryce, sort of a deep dive, about 30 minutes or so, just on Mouhamed Gueye. So that's what you're getting today on the podcast. And then we'll have more on Bufkin. We had Seth Lundy last week with Bill DeFilippo. We have all kinds of stuff on free agency. So I recommend listening and subscribing and checking out all of the podcasts, including all the free agency stuff. The emergency podcast I did on Saturday about the trade involving Usman Garuba and Ty Washington should also be in your feeds right now. So listen to that one as well. But without any further delay, here is myself and Bryce Hendricks talking about Mouhamed Gueye. I am joined now by Bryce Hendricks of the Upside Swings podcast and many other things in the basketball space. Bryce, thank you for doing this. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yeah, of course. Any excuse to talk about a WSU player making the NBA, I got to take because there's been like a grand total of 3 of them since I was born, basically. So I kind of gotta savor it when I can.
Yeah, I don't know how old you are, but I think you were probably a little bit young for the Klay Thompson era when he first came out. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
My first basketball memory is being 9 years old and watching Klay Thompson in Beasley. So that's like
there you go.
He was drafted, when I was 9. So I was a little before that. Kyle Weaver was technically after I was born as well. That's a real throwback, former Oklahoma City Thunder. But then it's those two, CJ Elleby and now Gueye, are the only 4 Cougs to be drafted since I was born.
Yeah, that kind of tells the story, and that also I said it to you offline. I'll say it to you online. I always try to do these kind of capsule episodes on the draftees, and when they drafted Mouhamed Gueye, you were my entire list. I was like, I hope Bryce will do this podcast because Washington State basketball, not the most fruitful, but I do trust you, which is important to ask. Come on the podcast. I've been on your podcast too, so I sincerely appreciate you doing this. And we'll spend most of the time on Mouhamed Gueye, but I will also let you get your takes off later on if you want to about Kobe Bufkin or whatever else you want to. But we'll come back to that at the end. So obviously it was not a huge surprise to me. I don't know about you about one of the Hawks drafting Mouhamed Gueye. I'd heard a little bit about that in a couple days before that he was on their radar. I want to go back to the beginning though. This is kind of the point of doing these is it was a talking point that was out there. He's not been playing basketball for all that long. He was a late arrival to the game of basketball by all accounts. Grew up in Senegal, of course, played soccer there, all that stuff. But physical tools wise, he's really impressive, and actually was a pretty big time high school recruit. Which I want to ask you, how does a guy that has top 50 bona fides end up at Washington State? All due respect to you, of course, and your Washington State Cougars, but that's kind of a surprise that someone of his pedigree would even have gone there. So tell me about kind of what happens there before he even gets to college.
So I was fairly familiar with Gueye, the second WSU kind of popped up on the radar for him. I was like, okay, I'm going to watch a ton of prolific prep. So I watched him a ton there, got a good feel for his game. He played with, some prolific prep produces a lot of, really high level recruits and NBA players. And so he's played with a lot of guys there. And like Jalen Green, for example. And his game was always he's very raw, but he's clearly super athletic. And then he got sold a lot as this has guard skill, big man who can dribble the ball a little bit and get on top of the rim and maybe shoot. The shot looked better in high school than it translated to college. But our staff is we have a really good connection with a lot of players from Africa. F.A. Bugatti was a great example who was from Nigeria and came. He played for the NBA Global Academy in Australia and came to WSU and basically had the only 2 healthy seasons of his entire basketball life at WSU, and then played for the G League Ignite and was good in his like 18 games for the Ignite, but then kind of fell off sadly due to injury. But this next year they have a big man from I believe Nigeria, Ruben Chinyelu, coming in, who had offers from like Florida and some other big programs. WSU, our staff, specifically John Anderschek, but also Kyle Smith, just really good recruiters in general. We just got recently Adam and Jay, who's had offers from like Memphis, Penny Hardaway at Memphis. So I feel like WSU is kind of on the rise here in terms of like top end talent. Now the portal's another thing, right? You lose guys like TJ Bamba to Villanova because we just don't have the NIL money. But Bamba's like a borderline NBA prospect to me. I wouldn't expect WSU to become any type of like prospect powerhouse, but don't be surprised if this is not the last guy under Kyle Smith to be drafted kind of in this top 45 range, because there's always, even like Kamani Hunsu, who is a big guy in France. I talked a lot with the great PD Webb about him and just like his game and how he kind of projects as a interesting, maybe 2-and-done player who had some growing to do, but just super athletic as like a 6'5" guard who can really pass. So, Kyle Smith has done a great job there, and Gueye is probably still like the prized recruit, that maybe the best recruit he'll ever get, because I believe on 247 he got as high as like 37 at one point. Like you said, bona fide top 50 guy. We beat out Kentucky and Kansas for him. So now how hard those guys are going after him, it's hard to say, but it feels like fairly consistent, especially with these athletic rim running big men from Africa. We just tend to have a great feel. Even Ajame Jong, who just left, was kind of pushed out a little bit, was a big recruit and just was from Africa and had only played for a couple of years, but our staff just has a great feel for getting those guys. So Gueye was kind of the second one, and it's been basically 4 straight years where we've signed a player like that. And like I said, I don't expect this to be the last one to get drafted.
Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you enjoy the DFS space, check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. It's amazing. I know that you will love it as well. It's very easy to use. I've been playing there for quite a while now, really a couple of years. It's really a breeze to operate within the PrizePicks structure. At PrizePicks, you pick 2 to 6 players, actually choose whether they have more or less a certain number of points or rebounds or yards in football, total bases in baseball, etc. With 25 times the money on your entries at PrizePicks, and they offer numbers on all kinds of sports: NBA, college basketball, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, soccer, esports, and more. And a whole entry can be done in just a minute or less. It's that easy and that quick. Plus, it's just you against the numbers, making it very straight ahead to evaluate. They have safe and fast withdrawals, and they're operating in more than 30 states now, plus Canada. Download the app right now, PrizePicks, or PrizePicks.com. To sign up with play Daily Fantasy Sports right now. If you're a first-time user, get 100% instant deposit match of $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. Don't forget that promo code. It is locked on at sign up for the instant deposit match up to $100. Check it out now at PrizePicks. So I want to follow up with what you said a bit ago about him being raw, which I've shared too. Like, he's very toolsy. The physical profile is really impressive. I think 6'10" without shoes, 7'3" wingspan, 9'2" standing reach. Like, he's very long and very talented as far as like kind of ball skills for his size. He is very thin right now. I think he weighed in at like 212 at the combine at that size, which is very, very thin. But I mean, I think we'll just start there, and the fact that like even the Hawks, and I heard a little bit from them around the draft about this. Like, they definitely liked what they saw, but it is certainly more of a projection bet. And I think that they liked a lot of the sort of the raw tools. And does that kind of stack up? Because clearly we'll talk about what he was in college and what he kind of has proven to be. But broadly speaking, before we got to kind of get more into the details, it seems like this is kind of a bet on the physical profile and the fact that he does have some ball skills and a general skill level, but not necessarily a guy who's like the most polished compared to a lot of people that might go in the top 40 of the draft.
So it's interesting because you're right. It's definitely a bet on tools. It's a bet on like these kind of disparate elements of his game. But I also think it's a bet on someone who took a gigantic leap from their freshman to sophomore year. He is already 21. So there's kind of these questions. And I think like basketball people tend to fall on different sides of the spectrum, where it's like, what's most important, like your actual like birth age or kind of your quote unquote playing age, with like, Gueye being someone who came to the game so late. And you can see that. Like, you watch him, like, there's just not a ton of natural basketball feel there at all. It really bothers me defensively. And some of that was that he did not want to play the 5 this year. That was not our staff's plan. That was not his plan. He was supposed to be the 4 with Deshaun Jackson and Adrame John kind of filling at the 5, but John was just too raw, and John couldn't stay healthy either. And then Jackson had a season-ending medical emergency that he didn't play a single game for WSU this year because he was hurt. And that's the type of stuff you don't expect. And Gueye did really admirably going from, hey, you're going to be a 4, you're going to be on the perimeter, we're going to let you use those skills, to you're our only big man. You have to do everything. He would play like 38 minutes a night most nights because we just had no other 5s. WSU was super thin at the big man spot because of injury stuff this year. In general, we had 2 players miss the whole season with medical emergencies, including Miles Rice, who had cancer. So it's like, that's just kind of like tough. It's a tough thing to plan for. But, I think the stuff with Gueye is that he's raw, but physically he's there. And like, he has like certain things that don't seem raw, in that his like footwork on the perimeter is pretty good. There's kind of with bigs, there's sometimes real mobile bigs and fake mobile bigs. I would say for the most part, he's a real mobile big in terms of purely lateral athleticism. He's pretty quick laterally. There were times, like as a freshman playing next to a Boogity, he would be like chasing shooters around the perimeter, getting over screens and stuff. Like, wow. That was usually against lower level comp, but it's something he could do here and there. And that's always impressive to see. But he's just not there, like mentally, in terms of how he reads the game. And then also skill wise, everything is flashes. But like I said, you buy the improvement a little bit. He took a major jump as a shooter. He took a major passing jump. He went from one of like the worst passers I've ever seen to pretty passable as the hub of our offense, which he had a lot of turnovers, right? Like, that rawness showed up, and a lot of his reads were fairly schemed, but he had to be the hub. He was the lead decision maker for WSU as a sophomore, as someone who's only that was his third year playing, I believe, third or fourth year, like, total playing basketball. So, you kind of buy that work ethic, you buy that improvement track record, and also everyone just loves him. Like, he's I could speak from experience. Like, he's just a nice guy. He's the type of guy who wants to high five everyone, who wants to say hi to you when he sees you in the hall, if he knows you. And, as a student, and also, I was on the women's basketball practice team, so I spent a lot of time kind of in and around Gueye when he was coming to or leaving practice. Like, just someone who was always, chipper, and that's probably something the Hawks bought into a little bit, is because NBA teams, as we saw with someone like Cam Whitmore falling to 20, really buy a good interview, really buy someone who they think can improve their locker room culture. And that's something everyone will just give glowing reviews about Gueye, because he's that type of guy. So you combine work ethic, good personality, and tools, and you kind of just hope that something can click eventually.
Yeah, that's basically exactly what I've heard from the Hawks. And clearly, they drafted the guy. They have some incentive to talk about him in a positive fashion to people like me. But I heard great stuff from what they thought about his makeup. He was he was engaging with them. They like what he brings in sort of that way. And look, to be fair, like I talked about how the perception is that he is raw, and there's some stuff that's raw. But like you pointed out, he made a big leap this year. He was all Pac-12. Like, you can debate what that means, but he was productive. It wasn't like he was a total, like, there are certain guys in the draft, this very well, that are like pure projection bets that have not been productive at the college level. He was productive. I mean, you can't fake first team all Pac-12. Like, that's something that does matter. 14 points, 8 rebounds, all that stuff. Actually, I believe he led the Pac-12 in offensive rebounding this year. That's an interesting thing. Obviously, the tools are there. I do want to ask you, and I don't want to put him in a box, but the thing about you talked about him playing center and kind of being pushed in that direction. I'm not making fun of Hawks fans, because they wouldn't have seen him so much, but I've already had a few people ask me, like, kind of why they need Bruno Fernando still, because they have Mouhamed Gueye as their third center. I'm like, guys, you got to watch the tape. Like, I don't think he's ready right now, and this is not a shot at him, to kind of anchor a defense at center. Like, he, for instance, he had less than a block a game this year. That's only one thing, but as far as like he was not supposed to be developed in that way. And I wonder what you make. We'll come back to the offense too, but I wonder what you make of the defensive side of the floor, because you talked about him getting over screens, all that stuff. Like, do you think that he has the ability, let's say 2-3 years from now, to be even as a backup center, like, can he anchor a defense that's like the only big, the primary big at the 5, or is it always going to be kind of like he needs somebody next to him to kind of help him do that?
I think he profiles best as like a change of pace defensive big. So
Okay.
if he's gonna fill in as like a backup role, say 18, 20 minutes a night, it would probably be to switch. I think the instincts and the execution are just too far behind. And while he's obviously young in playing time, it does matter that he's 21 years old. And at a certain point, in 2-3 years, he'll be basically hitting the prime of his career. I'm not sure the instinct curve can really jump that high. Some of the low block stuff was our staff told him, like, if he had 2 fouls, do not contest any more shots.
I was going to ask that because that's it kind of feels like that was a college system thing. That's because just on the tools alone, you feel like he would have blocked more shots than he actually did, just if he was allowed to kind of do that.
Yeah, we would tell him at a certain point, like, you got to stop, because we had no backup. Our backup big was a walk-on who joined the team halfway through the year because he played football through December. Like, that's
and that is good context. That's something that I would never have known, even if someone watches a lot of college basketball. This is why I have people like you on the podcast. But all right, tell me the story here, because it's always interesting. Kind of that nuance is important for sure.
Yeah, that's and like, that's not to say that he would have been like a ton better as a rim protector, because even when he is trying, like, and there's certain things that frustrate me. I don't know if I don't want to say it's a motor thing, because there are times he plays high motor, but like, he was kind of slow, like, recovering and hedge. Like, we would hard hedge him a lot because we didn't want him near the rim to pick up fouls. So we would hard hedge and then hope that, we could force teams to drive and into bad spots, basically. But there were times, like, he would just be slow recovering to the big and let a +1 pass into the paint for a huge dunk. And in his best games, he looks really high energy, but in his worst games, he looks really low energy. And that inconsistency can be a bit uncomfortable. And some of that, he did deal with a back injury towards the end of the year. But, I would say that is at least a little bit of a worry. I think some of it too is lots of times guys can look no motor if they don't really know what they're doing. And I think there is some of that with him too, where it's like, I heard that he would work hard, he would try and execute scheme, but he's just like, being new to the game. He's just not quite that quick reader, that quick. He doesn't have that adaptability defensively. So I'd be shocked if he could ever anchor a team as like a drop big or anything. That's just not his game. He'd probably have to be a switch guy, or at the very least to get to the level and kind of, force a scramble guy, which the Hawks have solid personnel, I feel like, on the wing to maybe execute that if needed. But that's not always ideal. And we'll talk about offense in a second, but he profiles like best offensively as a 5, I think. So I would be a little wary of playing him at the 4. Maybe he could get to that point where he can, I think the defense is going to have to play the 4, right? Like, especially backup force. Yeah. Like, he could absolutely guard Marcus Morris tomorrow, I think. And how well, it's hard to say, but he could not be food on the perimeter. But I don't know that you want him playing as the 4 offensively, because you're probably taking away his best skill set. So I think you got to find a way to either have him be a change of pace big, where he's switching a lot, or kind of live with maybe some rough rim protection. He'll have moments, like, his blocks look really good, especially if he can load up off one. That's where his athleticism is at its best. Like, he had quite a few like come from behind chase down blocks this year where he's a couple steps behind the ball, but because he can cover so much ground and explode off one really well, that's how he gets to his blocks. But he wasn't great in rotation as like the low man at all, and he was not someone who protected the rim well out of drop at all. So both those things kind of point to me where I'd be shocked if he's ever that type of defender as a backup or as a starter.
Yeah, I think that's good and useful for people to hear, because I think it's very natural to see his measurements, in particular the wingspan, the standing reach, and all that, just assume, center. And that's fine. And obviously he has a lot of center tools, but I think it's more nuanced than that, which I think you did a good job of sort of explaining there. And also just, the Hawks are, again, kind of betting on a little bit of the offensive approach too. So again, the offensive rebound was really impressive this year. I had one question before I kind of turn it over to you to tell me what you think I should know about his offense. He was not particularly efficient this year, which is, again, context is always important there. But 53% true shooting. He was kind of only mediocre on twos, which is a little bit strange given his skill set. I think he didn't. I saw some synergy numbers. Like he didn't shoot very well on like all jump shots, not just threes. Took a lot of mid rangers. Wasn't like fantastic at the rim either. Is that a concern? Like what is in your mind? I'll just open it up. Is that a concern, number one? And also, what do you think he's going to be like? What's his calling card on offense in the NBA? Like, what if it works? How's it going to work on offense?
I'm not super concerned about the like at rim efficiency. I would say he does not have great touch, but most of his rim attempts were self-created, as kind of weird as that sounds. And I tweeted this kind of early in the year, like when people would bring up his efficiency, like his shot diet is that of a wing because the offense ran through him. Most of his shots came out of isolation, which for good and for bad, like WSU did not have a point guard. They brought in Justin Powell, hoping he'd be a point guard. Powell just did not have that aggressive bone in his body to ever really run a high level pick and roll. TJ Bomba is just not that type of passer. Akimovsky is wing, whatever. Like they just did not have a point guard. So they kind of pivoted to they in the past, they've liked to run these heavy pick and roll schemes, lots of Spain, staggers, however, very pick and roll, but pick and roll nonetheless, with Mike Flowers and before that, Isaac Bonton. But last year they just don't have the horses to do it. That was going to be Miles Rice, but Miles Rice got leukemia and couldn't do it. So they were kind of like, okay, well, we're just going to pivot everything and just run nonstop chin sets. And so they would run a lot of, DHO stuff with Gueye, and hey, if the handoff isn't there, just ISO, just do whatever. And in his best games, it looks really good, right? Like if you go watch that Arizona game at Arizona where WSU upset the Wildcats, he looked great. He abused Azuolas Tubelis. He completely murdered Henry Vassar when they put him in, and Omar Bayo also could not touch him. So it's like at his best, it looks really good, but it also just results in a lot of one dribble mid-range shots, and he shot 34.9% on 150 long twos. It's not like a horrible
that
number.
Is a lot. That is a lot of long twos, though.
It is a lot of long twos
for a college season and a player of what his archetype is. Like just to back you up on that, that's a ton of long twos for this kind of player.
Yeah, sure. and I'm pretty sure every single one was self-created. I mean, probably not. Like there's probably like one or two floaters in there that were off a bounce pass on the baseline or whatever. But like in general, like most of those were self-created, and some of that's a worry, right? Like why is he only creating mid-range jumpers out of isolation? Mm-hmm. But also in the NBA, I don't think he's ever going to be running isolations. I actually think what his best skill set in the league is probably as a versatile role man. He didn't get to show it a ton because as a freshman, he only played 20 minutes a game, and he was playing next to one of the better role men in the Pac-12 in F.A. Abugadi. So he was kind of asked to be more of like a spacer and just kind of fill in the gaps offensively. And then during his sophomore year, they didn't have a point guard, but he is super springy off the ground, off one or off two, doesn't need a long load time at all. In fact, like some of his putbacks are part of what made him such an effective offensive rebounder. It's just that he gets off the ground quicker than basically everybody else. He was underrated as one of the quicker leapers in this draft, I think. And he has, you mentioned that 9-2 standing reach, like he can really high point lobs when he does get them. There was one specifically from his freshman year where TJ Bomba threw a lob from like 3 feet behind the 3-point line, and he jumped over Arizona State's big to like crunch this huge dunk. And it's just like, you don't, that type of stuff he didn't get to show a ton, but he has in his game. I mentioned the versatility with him as a leaper too. You can get up off one or off two. So all that stuff really projects to me strongly at the next level. Plus, the handle's raw. Like it's not all there. He predetermines moves a lot, but he does have legitimate shift for a 6'10" guy. Like when he does catch a big off guard and hits a hard right to left cross, he can really explode out of it and get downhill at times. So you think of that maybe in the short roll if a team is blitzing Trae Young off, and he can look off to the corner and hit a hard cross and get to the rim. So that's what I think he projects as best. If he did not get to do that at all, if he can, and then also you have the hope of the pick and pop, which
right.
I have questions on that, but if he can do that, then you're talking about a really, really versatile role man, I think.
Yeah, and his shot looks pretty good for a player of his size if you just look at the way it comes off his hand. The way that I heard it from someone around the Hawks is the way that I'll say it, is like they almost told me to not worry about the stuff he was doing in college almost. I think they're kind of trying to picture him out of that context, if that makes sense. That's a very simplified version, but like I think that to your point, he's not going to be playing anything close to the same role in the pros as he was at Washington State, which makes it a difficult evaluation in some respects, which is why another reason why I'm asking you, because you were up there, you were up close and personal. But it is kind of tough now that like I've been able to watch more and more film of him. Like it is hard to kind of figure out what tracks and what translates and what doesn't, because of just the way that he was used. And they are buying. I think they buy his jump shot. I don't know if that's going to work long term, but they do think that it's projectable. That's something Landry Fields said from the podium at the introductory press conferences. Like they do think that he can shoot it. They did kind of stress, and maybe it's just expectation management, but they're trying to like hey, he's got a long way to go. Like they're definitely they're acknowledging that. Like they're talking about him like he's more of a long term play. But I'll be interested to see what they envision the role being. I think he's going to be in College Park a lot this year, if I had to guess. They haven't said that, but I'm guessing that's what's going to happen. And I look forward to just seeing him play against pros and more of a scheme that what they actually want him to do. And like that can tell you a lot. Like how do they even use him in College Park can actually be pretty intuitive as to how they're going to use him if he ever makes it sort of to regular minutes.
I have a quick brief anecdote about the shot.
Feel free.
WSU implemented this. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but basically it's this machine that sat behind the baskets of our practice gym that would measure the arc of your jumper, right? And because the thought was that Gueye's was just too flat. He was generally shooting about 41, 42 degrees on his shot. And that's why like he's so comfortable taking mid-rangers and then he steps out to three and he's so uncomfortable because the arc is so flat. And you think generally like you want higher arc as you get farther out. I shot out it a couple times. I shoot like a 48 degree arc. So it's a very extreme difference, but that was like a big thing for them is they're like, listen, if he wants to shoot threes, he has to get the arc up. And I think that kind of shows if you watch his tape, like it's not something we always think about into like when you break down a player's shooting and their shooting projection, you're like, okay, let's start with form. Let's go to touch. We don't always think of like the arc of a shot or like some of the minute details like that. But that's something they were really, focusing on. And it didn't really work in terms of the numbers from three, but he did shoot like much, much better from the free throw line. Obviously did take and make those mid-rangers occasionally. So that's kind of just a fun little story that WSU staff was doing.
It is. I mean, and I think that's again something that's pretty interesting to hear. And he wasn't I don't think he did drills at the combine. I think he just kind of measured. There was some injury stuff. Is there anything concerning about the injuries? I meant to ask you that earlier. Like I know he didn't participate with from what I saw, but is there anything that lingers that you're aware of coming out of college? Because he played the whole season.
He had some back issues that started about halfway through the year, which is almost ironic, right? You think like, oh, he carried the whole team on his back. It's like,
yeah.
And then like towards the end of the season, during like the final play, I think this was like the final play of the second to last regular season game, he like throws down this huge dunk and Braxton Mia like shoves him in the back and he falls hard on his back. This was at UW, right? So it's like kind of a rivalry game. UW was awful this year, so it's like they were kind of in a bad mood, it seemed like. And he falls hard on his back and he kept playing, but if you watch like the couple games after that, specifically like that, the Cal and Oregon games in the Pac-12 tournament, he just did not look healthy. He looked rough. He was slow. And like when you're a big who relies so much on athleticism, like that's really killer, but we didn't have any other options. And then he didn't play in the NIT game. He was out for the NIT game for that back issue. And instead of playing it big, WC just started 6'5" Kamani Hansu at the 5. So
which tells you all you need to know about how the situation was, like you said earlier, like the fact that they were strapped to do that. I just want to make sure that I circle back to that because I noticed that he didn't do any. And look, your mileage may vary on how much you care about the drills at the combine. I don't really care much about the drills at the combine, to be honest. He did measure in, but there you go.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, like I wouldn't expect it to be like something huge long term because it was I believe caused by like specific instances, which is generally like less worrying than like a chronic issue for me. But it's worth noting at the very least that he's a big guy who's hurt his back before. So
Yeah, and again, the frame he's very very thin. I think just like most prospects, Kobe Buckins one that's like this as well. He's going to have to get bigger and get stronger. That's notable. They all know that, and they've been very open about it too. I mean, we could go forever. I know I don't want to overstuff you on this, but I'll ask you this before we get out of here. I asked you kind of what the role might be, but I'll allow you to dream a little bit. What's the relatively reasonable, like, best case scenario for Mouhamed Gueye? Like, what do you see if everything comes together in a way that could, like, not crazy 100 percentile, but you know what I mean? Like, what's a positive outcome for him as far as like what his role becomes, what he's able to do at the next level? Because look, it's still a second round pick, but it's a top 40 pick. It's a real investment that they're making in him. So I wonder what you think like it could look like. Again, I'm not going to hold you to this. I'm purposely asking you to be optimistic, but what does that kind of look like for you?
I think the best case outcome is that he is like a top 25-ish big who is, if he's a backup, he's one of the best backups. If he's a starter, your defense is probably rough, but he has some playoff utility because he can switch. So that would be that's the best case outcome, is that he's not like a great regular season big, but because he can switch and in the best case, he can shoot a little bit, he becomes a really valuable playoff player. I think his best case actually looks kind of similar to like a Noah Clowney's, who went 18 picks above him, and I kind of prefer Gueye because I think Gueye is more athletic. But I mean, obviously I'm a little biased, but I actually came across a little lower on Gueye than I expected. Of the three guys on my podcast, I had him the lowest. I had him right at 41, so I thought 39 was like
right exactly there. Yeah,
and I think that's like your best case is that he's a 15 to 20 minute guy in the regular season who provides some bench spark, but then in the playoffs, like if you need to, he can close games because he can guard fives, but he can also switch and he can hit some shots on the outside while still being a competent role man for a Trae Young or a DeJounte Murray or a Kobe Buckins. So
there you go. No, and I think that makes a lot of sense what you said there, and there's some value to being versatile and being able to switch, and I think especially long term, if you buy that the Hawks might be building around a Kongwu, that's interesting too. Like another guy who is not the biggest, but also very very versatile defensively. They might be able to be pretty creative if things were to work out very very well with Mouhamed Gueye. Which again, you can't bank on that. This is still a second round pick, but I wanted you to be optimistic because I think you know me a little bit. Not always the most optimistic in the world. I like to be practical, but I had you on to talk about your guy from Washington State. I have to let you cook a little bit about the positivities. So.
Absolutely. Do you? We could spend some time on the pessimistic case, but it's the exact same as every second round pick, right? He's just not an NBA player. He doesn't spend much time here.
Yeah, I almost asked that, but that's like nothing translates, and you're just out of the league in 3 years, and that's a very normal thing. I mean, look, I don't have all the data in front of me, but there's been some studies made about second round picks, especially guys outside the top 35 or 36, whatever it is, and like the hit rate's not very high. I mean, a lot of guys wash out, and that wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world. And again, they're kind of banking on him as more. I don't want to use the term project negatively, but they see him as like it's more of a long-term play, which is fine. That's part of the deal with second round picks. Well, feel free to add anything else you want to, Bryce, and if not, please also tell people where they can find you, because I really enjoy what I've done on your podcast before. You are a great follow on Twitter, and I'll let you plug yourself as well. But I will say that right now, everyone should be following Bryce's work.
I appreciate that. I guess my final thought with Gueye is just like, he's a good interview. So Brad, if you ever get the chance,
hopefully it's Summer League. I'm looking forward to it.
He's such an easy guy to root for, right? Like coming from WSU is obviously that gives him a special place in my heart. But even compared to other like former Cougs, like he's just he's such a nice guy. Every interaction I've ever had with him has been positive. He would always, give me a fist bump and ask how I was doing whenever I saw him, and that type of stuff is like, you don't always get that from like athletes, especially like. I mean, he was probably a top 3, like most famous person on WSU's campus at any given time. Like, and he stands out a little more than 6'0" Cam Ward. He's a 6'11" guy with super long arms that scratch the back of his knees. So he kind of be spotted anywhere. And, for him to just be that positive all the time, I think it makes him really easy to root for. But yeah, I mean, you can follow me at Twitter on at Bryce Hendrick 14. Follow the Upside Swings podcast because we do a lot of work over there, and talked about Gueye, and we've had Brad on twice now, talk about the Hawks.
Yeah.
Hopefully Twitter works.
Hopefully.
But if not, then that's my @ on Instagram and TikTok too, I guess. So maybe I'll
follow the podcast. If nothing else, please subscribe to Upside Swings.
Yes, absolutely.
If Twitter goes away, that's one way to find you somewhere, and then you can share on that podcast where to find you from there. So, but thank you again. I really appreciate you doing this. I don't know when exactly this is going to post, but it'll be before Summer League. I can pledge to that. And a lot of things working around the scenes. The Hawks, when we're recording this podcast, the Hawks have done nothing. So if they do something after this, we'll find out. And hopefully this podcast will see the light of day. So cross your fingers on Mouhamed Gueye being on the roster. And then if not,
you'll just have to send it. You'll just have to send this audio clip to whoever trades for him and just say you can.
Yeah, as soon as that trade happens, I will either press publish on the podcast and just say, oh, it went up. Sorry, guys. Or just forward it on to somebody else. But thanks again, Bryce. I do appreciate it, man. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this podcast. Again, follow Bryce's work. And we'll see you all next time.